back to the show. Today we're talking about the American Revolution, more specifically the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party. I'm here with Eason and Niall.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to be here.
Yes. So I understand you guys have created little paragraphs discussing what sparked the event and what happened after the event, and I have gone ahead and made summaries. So I'll read the summaries for the Boston Massacre.
Sounds good.
Basically, what started the event were some Americans were angry over the new laws imposed by British rule. These laws were mostly tax-based that many Americans found unfair, and a whole bunch of riled up Americans found a lone British soldier, Hugh White, and surrounded him. Hugh White was a private, so he was not well trained, and once he was surrounded, struck a American patriot in the arm, and that started an all-out brawl. And soon Mr. White called for backup, and Thomas Preston, a captain, arrives after being called for backup. Unfortunately, a lot of the soldiers were not well trained, and once they were surrounded by the Americans, they shot prematurely, which is how the massacre happened, and 5 people were ultimately killed.
That's terrible.
Yes, it wasn't actually that big, I don't know why they call it a massacre per se.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this now?
Pretty interesting.
So, I understand how this, the massacre happened, but Eason, do you know any key events that led to the massacre?
Yes, actually. Back then, when there was only 16,000 colonists and 2,000 British soldiers to enforce certain laws, such as the Stamp Act or the Townshend Act that we'll later talk about, the American colonists felt like these new laws were repressive, and they did not get any say in the matter. So basically,
so it's just they're just giving
similar
them laws.
to tyranny. So
yeah.
after this, this sparked a rally cry with no taxation without representation. Fights between American patriots and British loyalists were common and were increasingly more common. On February 22nd, a group of patriots attacked a loyalist store. A British soldier heard this noise and tried to break up the mob by shooting through his window.
Just interrupt you. I've heard that's what a lot of Americans would do then. Any business or place that was known to be run by British loyalists would constantly get vandalized and attacked. So it was,
pretty much what happened. Unfortunately, through the mist, an 11-year-old bystander watching the mob terrorize the shops was killed, and this is what is thought to spark some of the sparked the name or the events of the Boston Massacre.
Yeah, I see how when another power that doesn't even belong on the land, and they bring you new laws, how that could start a conflict. But if you think about it, the American colonists were doing that to the Native American colonists. Mm-hmm. Yes, I found that kind of funny. Niall, I hear you know a lot about what were the consequences of the massacre.
Yes, so after the massacre, Captain Preston, along with all his soldiers, were jailed for the killings, but still propaganda ran rampant throughout Boston and all the other colonies for both sides. The Patriots painted the Loyalists to be instigators for the massacre, and the Loyalists made the Patriots out to be treasonous. Tensions grew for years between British and America and led to the Boston Tea Party, which then eventually led to the American Revolution.
Yeah, and about the Tea Parties, we actually have the next segment is about the Boston Tea Party. So I'll go ahead with the summary again. Britain colonists who were frustrated at the British rule with all these new tax laws and the Boston Massacre, so they decided to dump 342 chests of tea imported by the British East India Company into the Massachusetts harbor, which in today's money would cost $1,700,000.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Damn.
it's a lot of tea. And this actually was considered the first major defiance against British rule in America, which was kind of funny that this was just tea. There was a massacre that went on, but this is what definitely started the whole American Revolution.
Huh.
Okay.
So we did go over we know that one of the motivations was the Boston Massacre, and we know there were some new tax laws, but Easton, why don't you go ahead and explain stuff in more detail?
Yeah, so one of the first taxes that was imposed against the American colonists was called the Stamp Act, and basically this put a heavy tax on all forms of paper, such as diplomas, newspapers, stamps, public pieces of paper, pamphlets, and other paper items that were public. This caused protests, and another event that caused more problems was the Townshend Duties or Revenue Acts. This act resulted in certain items like glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea were more expensive to buy from select stores in the American colonies. And this resulted in Bostonians resorting to black market items such as tea from Dutch colonists to get their fill instead of having to pay a massive tax on items they can pay less for in the black market.
The funny thing is, today we still see a lot of that where people revolt against tax laws, like the legalization of cannabis in Canada. Majority of people still buy their weed from the black market and not the government shops. They say it's the tax is too high on it. So, and now I understand you have information about what happened after the Tea Party.
Yes, so many weeks after the Tea Party occurred, the harbor started to smell of tea after the 92 pounds of tea was dumped there. After the British found the tea, the harbor was closed until all the tea bags were recovered. This was a result of colonists having more strict ruling against the British. It also implemented many other laws of which Americans responded with protests and resistance towards the 1774 petition for the British to repeat the Intolerable Acts. And there's also a somewhat current event. There was people throwing tea over a boat in 2017, kind of, I guess, to reenact the Tea Party. But
Is this like a protest, or is it just like
Yeah.
something to kind of like celebrate the independence?
no, this was a protest due to political tensions because this is around the time. This was about a year after Trump got elected into office, and as we know, people weren't happy with him. So
That's interesting. Easton, do you have any final words?
No, I think we've all summarized it quite well
Well, it's
and
been
to a pretty good depth of what happened back then.
a great podcast, boys.
yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes. See you guys next
Anytime.
time.